Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. And we have one ask of you, and that is if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and you can rate or review these episodes, it really does help us massively in terms of reaching a new engaged community of marketers just like you. So thank you so much if you are able to take those few seconds to rate or review us. Now, today I am joined by Peter Hammer. He is the founder and CEO of Marketing Scientist. And in our episode today, we delve into the evolving landscape of video content and advertising. We discover how Peter measures content, audiences, and commercial outcomes and gains insights from his vast experience with major brands like Paramount, Sony, and Discovery. We will learn about the changes in video consumption over the last 5 years, the importance of evidence-based decisions, and the vital role of effective sponsorships in modern marketing. The episode today provides a comprehensive look at the complexities and opportunities within the media industry. Before we hear from Peter, just thanks to our sponsor of today's episode. It is Diplomat Agency. Go to diplomat.agency to find out all about the service provided by Diplomat. They've been set up to help brands who are trying to grow internationally. So huge problem brands face is when they have a home market and things are going incredibly well. They're reaping the rewards of the demand and that current demand, and then they look to expand internationally. The things that worked in their home market do not work. And so Diplomat Agency has been set up to help brands overcome that, figuring out where to establish and how to go about doing it from strategy and execution, global brand creative. So visit diplomat.agency to find out more. And now let's get into the episode with Peter Hammer of Marketing Scientist. Peter, thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. Great to have you with me.
No, thanks.
Listen, you're getting to the end of your day. You're in Sydney. I'm starting my day here in Dublin. For anyone who doesn't know you and hasn't heard of you, I'd love to just kind of get a bit of a brief introduction for everybody listening or watching.
Yeah, no, thank you. So my name's Pete, obviously, and I run a business called the Marketing Scientist Group. We're a measurement company, and what that means is we measure all kinds of things, but a lot of it includes content, audiences, and commercial outcomes. At the minute, we've been doing quite a lot with video, so understanding the total video landscape across the different markets we work in, as well as how brands and advertising fits within that content. So it's a really, I think, exciting time for video. There's been a lot of change in the last 5 years, and we've got some great, research and data that supports that. And we have the great pleasure of working with some really big brands. So, we've done studies with Paramount, Discovery, Sony, News Corp, but then locally here in Australia and New Zealand, brands like Nine and Seven West and Three. So, it's a real mixed bag in terms of the kinds of clients we work with and the kinds of challenges they're facing. But at the heart of it, it's really about understanding those audiences so that they can make those evidence-based decisions.
Brilliant. I want to get into a lot of that, what you found and kind of some of that measurement, and even working with some of the clients that you have. But take me back a bit, your path into academia. So did you go straight into academia?
I started my working life at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for Marketing Science, which is part of the University of South Australia, which is incredible. I mean, I couldn't have planned it better given how big and important the institute has become. And I know, like on your show, you've had both Jenny Romanek and Karen Nelson-Field, who Jenny's still there, and Karen is, of course, a key alumni. Who are now kind of world leaders in their space around distinctive brand assets, and for Karen, it's modern attention measurement. So, it's a really important center, but it's really, I think, funny from people from the outside because, within Australia, Adelaide is a pretty small city. I think it's our fifth largest city. And yet there's this kind of globally renowned research center, in terms of how marketing works and how brands grow. And the work that Byron and the marketing scientists have done there is really incredible. But for me personally, it kind of really set me up on a path to success. So when I was there, I was part of the kind of media and advertising arm of the Institute. And so working with
Okay.
clients initially there, and then was able to kind of step out into the real world and work with some of those massive brands as an in-house researcher. So I've had experience working at Cartoon Network and CNN, digital brands like Yahoo. My most recent role was with Warner Brothers Discovery, where I was the head of insights and analytics for their APAC region. So that meant
Right.
measuring TV and digital streaming services across a huge array of markets.
When you were at the Institute, did you, like, sometimes when you are somewhere, you don't realize what it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, did you realize when you were there how big and important it was?
I mean, yeah, as a student who kind of came into that, I probably didn't appreciate really how important and how difficult that is for an academic institution. Like what they've been able to
Yeah.
achieve commercially as an academic institution, I think is a feat in itself. And the way that they've been able to impact industry, like it's not something that I kind of thought about at the time, but really understand now, having kind of been on the other side of the fence and how incredibly difficult it is. But I think the other thing too is even in the time since I've been there, which was quite a while ago now, things have evolved, and the work, particularly the book that Byron wrote, I think it's about 11, 12 years ago now, has really brought a lot of the findings of Andrew Ehrenberg and his colleagues that started all the way back in the 60s to kind of the masses. And it's interesting now, the kinds of conversations we have. Like I don't need to explain what the Institute stands for and what the marketing are. It's kind of now widespread, well-known knowledge. So you're not having to fight that fight, which when I was back there, that was certainly not the case.
Yeah, and I remember a previous CEO of mine, it was probably 8 years ago, when everyone joined marketing, he asked them to read that book. I'm going to say he got them to. But it was really fundamental and foundational to the way he was starting to think about marketing and kind of the media spend and how we thought about it. And I think what's interesting is, and you're kind of touching on as well, the conversations and just the discussions, they are evolving, and there's definitely people out there who are like, well, maybe it's not right, but and it's kind of interesting to hear the debates. And I always feel that it's probably the most important thing is to kind of read as much as you can of these things and then make the right decisions based on where you are and what sector you're in and what part of growth you're at. You know what I mean? What stage you're at. It's kind of, it's important to have kind of the foundational knowledge. So definitely encourage people to, if they haven't read. So, see, what then spurred you on to go client side, going into kind of out of the Institute?
Yeah, well, I think, what spurred me, I was doing real world research. So, I mean, again, that's another really, I wouldn't necessarily say unique, but certainly a kind of more rare thing in academia, where you're doing work where you're working with corporations and you're doing research that's having an impact on their business, put those learnings into practice. And that was something that, I really wanted, within my career. And I think, having a diverse career is also important in terms of what value you can also bring.
Yeah, that is so true. I think, you could stay in academia and not have that real world. Although you're, talking about the Institute, obviously there is kind of that real world stuff, but even kind of people agency side, who stay agency side their whole career might miss out on just a dip client side, because then they understand like what goes on the other side of the fence. I think is fascinating. When you work client side, you touched it there before, you worked on kind of either regional, as in APAC regional, or global work. And I'm kind of fascinated in doing, having done work in that kind of global space, is kind of understanding the differences and then the not differences in across markets. And it's really interesting when you're looking, I would imagine, at particularly kind of the measurement space. probably a lot of the stuff, does it even out in a way in terms of the differences, or did you observe kind of actually some markets behave remarkably different?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and like we focus a lot on the differences. Like, no one's ever going to put a press release out that says, "Oh, well, everything's pretty much the same as last year." Like, in our nature, we want to know what's different rather than what's the same. And I think this is again, the benefit and the wisdom drilled into me in the institute, which is actually that sameness and that replication is hugely important for understanding how markets work. And, when there are exceptions to that, it's incredibly important to know because it means that something might not be right or there's an opportunity in that. But to speak to your question around, cross markets, so particularly my role as head of APAC, I mean, you can't think of a more diverse region than
Yeah.
Asia Pacific. And, I'm always really jealous of, my former colleagues in EMEA um, and LATAM because, yes, they're very diverse regions as well. But I felt like I got the raw end of the deal when it came to diversity. But, also in a good way. I mean, there are some amazing things that come out of, markets like Japan and Korea are completely different in terms of some of the
Yeah.
great content that they produce that is really unique in its and distinctive in the way that it looks and the kinds of stories that they like to tell. And I think that's really interesting. But, again, my focus is around the commercials and the audiences and, how they behave. And whenever I was, either working with a new client or, again, in that role, speaking to, say, the GMs in the different countries, the first thing they would always tell me is that their market was really, really different. And I
Right.
would kind of grin and nod and, kind of take it all in. But like when you stripped it down to the fundamentals and you were comparing the similar kind of things, like the differences were often not that great. Like to give you an example, a lot of people say how digital is really different, but we did some research a few years ago where we stripped it back and we made it look kind of like TV data, and lo and behold, a lot of those patterns like double jeopardy and the importance of penetration for growth and all of those user profiles, etc. They all kind of look fairly similar to how TV did, which is
Right.
obviously a very different medium and yet, kind of very similar. And yeah, so I think, the differences are there, but often it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah.
Probably the one exception to that is when market dynamics come into play. So there are some markets where certain things don't exist. Language is obviously
Right.
crucially important for some markets rather than others. I'll give you an example. Like I've had a lot of conversations about TikTok lately. And, my comment in one meeting was, well, I can tell you, I can guarantee you that TikTok's not big in India. And they were kind of shocked. They're like, well, how do you know that? I was like, because it's banned in India. So, things like market dynamics really frame kind of, what products and services can work. But what's fascinating about that TikTok example is that if you then look at kind of the subsequent behavior after the ban, it kind of got redistributed across the other kind of similar brands. So, Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts and things
Yeah.
is kind of what we've been seeing. So again, markets kind of behave as you would expect them to. But obviously, there's a
Yeah.
huge dynamic of, something's changed, it's been taken away or put in, or, whatever that
Yeah.
market has that's unique for that place.
Yeah. Is the product available?
Yeah,
Like,
product available in the app store. Yeah, that's got to be a big determinant, I think.
it is. It's like, honestly, and I know that it is just so fascinating because, and I think we all, like, I think we all do it. Like when you live somewhere, or even like, if you're working for a brand or a company, like you're so obsessed with that and you're so living in that you become blinded maybe by the things that aren't as different as you kind of think they are. Because people think, oh, I'm obsessed about my brand. Nobody else obsesses about it like you do. If you live in country X, you're like, oh, we're so different because you have that probably national pride or whatever it is that you kind of want to be different. But it's like, a lot of the human behaviors are very similar. And I think it's finding even from a communications point of view, like what are the insights that are universal? Because people do, like, people do behave quite similarly. Like human needs are reasonably similar in it, but then it's, how, even access, I think, when you said India there, I was like, well, maybe it's that I didn't know TikTok was banned. I was like, well, maybe it's just access to mobile phones, because I know texting is a huge part of the culture in India. There's a whole, um, Apple, the job site works on basically texting people, so it's just those kind of dynamics really, really matter and kind of make a difference. So what then are you, I guess, like, what are the projects you love working on?
Oh, I mean, I've been so fortunate to work on so many great things. And yeah, I feel really lucky. But I think at the heart of it, like I'm really passionate about media. And I mean that from what it brings to, Australian society and global society. It enables people's stories to be told. It frames the way we often see the world. Things like news media is incredibly important for, society and democracy. And, I've had the real pleasure of working alongside the people who make all of that stuff happen. And, like I have a real sense of pride of as being part of that. But, my angle or my role in that is often that these things cost money. And
Mm-hmm.
increasingly and more in my new role within my own business, we're really focused on the commercial strategy and outcomes for those businesses because media doesn't work if it's not sustainable. And so a lot of the work we do now is really around how can you grow those audiences or subscribers? How can you make sure that you're monetizing that content for the people who make the content so they can keep making it or create opportunities for marketers and advertisers. So they want to invest in these media platforms because they can then reach the audience, which then means, they'll get the investment to keep building the content to get those audiences. So, those, at the heart of it, those commercial decisions are incredibly important to the long standing health of the media industry. And so, I'm passionate about trying to keep that alive. And, despite all the disruption, I see there's a lot of opportunity that lies ahead. It might not look like it did before, but I still think there's going to continue to be a lot of opportunity for, those businesses to shine.
And so then it's kind of more like so making sure that, if a brand is working with, let's say, Nine or so, whatever the network is, and kind of go, right, making sure that the brand is getting the value, but that the media outlet is creating a way for the brand to create the value. So you kind of sort of almost in the middle of the two, making sure both are getting what they need out of it. You're making sure that the value is understood from both sides.
Yeah. And I would say intermediary in the sense that, the reason that some of these businesses work with, in fact, probably all the reason that the businesses work with us is because we're independent. So
Yeah.
when we're doing work around audience measurement or brand measurement, we do it without any influence of what those media owners want. So the brands who are seeing the end product that work can have trust that an independent party has they're not we've done the work. It's not the media owner marking their own homework. And it's that kind of trust in or building trust in those platforms, encourage them to continue to invest in those platforms. But also it's about, making it work harder as well. So we have done quite a lot of work in recent years around TV sponsorships. And, TV sponsorships are a bit of a kind of dark art. Like people love doing them. So I think part of the benefit is they're just really cool. And so people want to be, attached to content and brands. But, increasingly, marketers are under pressure to show the impact of those elements and, what investment is that doing, especially when some other media have the illusion of being very measurable. And so, our role has been helping brands like Paramount understand the science of sponsorship and what are the elements that make a good sponsorship. But equally, tactically for brands, you've given me 4 options, which one's best and why, and help me understand how I might do it better next year. Because often, these brands are multi-year sponsors, or, if it's part of a sporting code, it might be a very long kind of sponsorship engagement. So, they benefit not only from learning how to make a good sponsorship, but how their specific brand might be able to best leverage and get the outcome they're looking for.
Amazing, because that is definitely one, sponsorship I think people can struggle with. It's a very powerful tool for marketers, but I know years go past, like kind of the measurement of it and the effectiveness and the impact of it can be challenging. What are some of those elements, without giving away secret sauce, that are key to a successful sponsorship partnership?
So, I mean, I could do a whole presentation, but I think at the heart of it, the real benefit of a sponsorship is that you are aligning with usually a mass reach piece of content. So, like as an example, in Australia, there are some really big tentpole reality shows like the Master Chef and the Block and Married at First Sight, and those shows get multi-million, million plus, sometimes 2 million reach audiences. So you're already attached to a vehicle that's getting a lot of eyeballs. But then it's also about all the different elements. So what we proved in one of the most recent studies we did with Paramount was that the additive value of adding more assets. So in modern sponsorships, you have not only brands usually within the content itself, but you also have things that are called billboards that sit at the top and tail of a break. You might have a TVC that sits within that break, but that TVC or TV commercial might include talent from the show. And so we were able to use a bunch of different experiments and as well as technology, gaze tracking attention, to understand, what happened when people not only looked at the ads, but also elements within those ads or the content, and how that had, a flow-on effect to effectiveness. So, like one of my favorite findings was, one of the key roles of a sponsorship is it actually makes people look at the ad more. So if you have, say, a product within a show, we use eye tracking to see, did they look at that object? And then we can also see, did they look at that object again when it was in the ad break? And we were able to confirm that with science, which again means that you're priming your audience to know about that brand and getting those kind of multiple impressions of that brand to really drive it into memory. And that drives outcomes like mental availability, which we know from Ehrenberg Bass work is crucially important. So it's that kind of stuff which puts it in a language that marketers are now speaking, and it puts it in a kind of a modern context using modern technology to be able to uncover that that gold dust.
And it helps so much with thinking about the conversation that a brand marketer can and should have with not only their media agency, but with the station, the production house, or whoever's making that content. Because then you're like, actually, it's not just about a product placement, or it's not just about an ad break. It's about how you kind of can be more integrated, for want of a better word, in the show experience. And you talked about shows like Married at First Sight, which are huge hits, and it's fascinating. Again, the death of TV, it's been dying for years, but you still have these shows that are people come and watch, and people make appointments to watch. Like that still happens. I think people think it doesn't, but what's happening more of, I think, now is obviously there's more of the spill out and spin off content that people are able to have stuff afterwards, and kind of it lives on. So if your brand is part of that as well, you just have more, again, integration, and then, as you say, then it's connecting all the dots and improving your chances of kind of being just remembered and getting that hard to get attention. It's brilliant. That's fantastic. So anyone listening thinking about sponsorship, there's a top tip for you from Pete Hammer.
Yes, go download our research.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Speaking of research, it's like just a beautiful segue. You do some great research, and as you say, people can get it. What's the website for people to go to if they want to just quickly, pause this and go look at the research you have?
Marketingscientist.com is probably the easiest place to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're yes, definitely more kind of sharing across other brands as well. But yeah, it's probably the easiest place to start.
Great. Well, people are backlisting now. So if you've gone marketingscience.com, there you go. But you've got some new report out, the Total Video Report. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. So we actually started the project 5 years ago, and originally it was actually called the Total Video Project, but it is now extended into a ongoing thing. So it can't just be a project anymore. But effectively, we were working with a brand who had a lot of different content. So, they had content going on pay TV channels. They had content going on terrestrial free air channels. They were selling content to SVOD platforms. They were putting stuff on YouTube. And they didn't really have a way to stitch together all the different kind of data they had. And so they kind of enlisted us to kind of help with that process. And we needed some benchmarks to be able to calibrate and turn all of the data into people-like data to make it useful. That led us to kind of do the first of these, which was back in 2018. But we have since kind of repeated it at different points. And we've just done a brand new one at the end of 2023, which neatly fits into kind of 5 years later. And so the latest report is called Total Video Transformation or Decoding Total Video Transformation. I should probably know the title of my own report. But, effectively, and I kind of alluded to this before, like we've been through a period of massive change, kind of probably more so than TV and media have faced, in a very long time, at least in an Australian context. And so, what this report does is provide a snapshot at a point in time, but comparable to the snapshot that we did 5 years ago. And for us to be able to understand kind of how things have changed and what people are watching today and how that's evolved. Because we know, a lot of marketers and media owners and advertisers are, really confused. And you make the point around TV dying. I feel like it's been dying my whole career, and yet it's still very, very much alive. But what this data and report shows is, that the total video is very much, we consume the same amount of total video that we ever have rather. But what this also shows is that how we are consuming it is evolving, and that has kind of downstream effects of the type of content people are watching, like the genres, whether it is ad supported, which is crucial for marketers, and the new impact of things like TikTok or ad supported SVOD, which are kind of new since we did it last time.
What then kind of are some of the learnings that marketers should take out of the report?
So, we were talking a bit earlier around kind of different age groups, and so something that we've been trying to understand is, like you hear those comments like, young people don't watch TV anymore. They only watch TikTok. Well, actually, our data shows pretty conclusive that they do continue to watch TV. Granted, it's not maybe as much as what it used to be, but they still do tune in. But what's really interesting about younger viewers too is that they have a unique viewing pattern. So we see for them that prime time is largely similar between the younger 18 to 34s versus the older 55 to 69s. But we see during the day that young people tend to consume more video across the day. So that's where platforms like YouTube and TikTok come into its own, and typically more so on, say, a smartphone when you're maybe away from home.
Yeah.
So that's, that's, I think, been a really interesting finding. SVOD, or subscription video on demand, so platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus, etc. Again, making up a huge share of viewing minutes now, and has grown since the last time we did the work. We see that younger viewers are consuming a lot more of SVOD now than what they were previously. But the other thing, or again, the great ability of this report is that we can not only look at viewing, but we can look at, say, subscription behavior. And so what we've been seeing too is that they are pretty much hitting full penetration amongst that younger cohort. So whilst they've grown a lot in the last 5 years, they're unlikely to continue growing at the same rate because, there's no more, further penetration kind of left when you're at that
Okay.
kind of younger end. So that's something that, again, we're getting a lot, it kind of is starting a lot of conversations with different businesses who are maybe either have some of those assets or looking to partner with those assets. So yeah, it's something that we are digging into a lot more.
Interesting. And what are the differences, I guess, between now and maybe 5 years ago in terms of that consumption? Is it just that the technology is better and that, it's easier to look at a smartphone now? Like I remember probably 5 or 6 years ago, we were testing the birth of the kind of testing group, and we were testing, like, was video perform better than static ads on Facebook? Like, I'm not joking. We were actually testing that, trying to figure out. But now you wouldn't even question that. But like, I'm trying to think back. Was it just that the technology is better, the phones are better, the ability to just have it, or is it just we're just consuming it that way now because it's kids have grown up with that, right? So they were the ones handed the phone at the dinner table when parents wanted to get 20 minutes of peace and quiet at a restaurant.
Yeah. So there's a few things there. I think like 2018 was not that long ago. SVOD in particular already had a strong presence, although TikTok didn't exist when we did it 5 years ago. So that's something that has changed in terms of the market dynamics, like I was talking about before. And there's definitely been a big push from some of the big global, but even local players. So I think when we ran it in 2018, there was 7 major SVOD players. We now track 13, and there is also a long tail that continues on from that. So there is just a lot more activity kind of in that space. But because there's a lot more activity and focus and marketers pushing them to go and, if they're the brand manager for, SWOT Service X, they're trying to get them into their platforms, and, people are going there. It does mean that the kind of content we're consuming in totality is also evolving. So, the one of the great benefits that SVOD has brought to, say, the Australian market is that we now get a lot more scripted content than we ever had. But unsurprisingly, now people watch more scripted content because they're spending more time on those SVOD platforms. And so there are more movies to choose from. There are more, dramas, premium quality dramas, which, used to be kind of locked away in the, high cost pay TV platforms, and are now kind of readily available. So I think there's dynamics like that have really changed, not only kind of how we're watching, but also what we're watching when we get there. It also means that for, traditional TV businesses, things like sport and news are even more important now. And so kind of non-scripted content, is continues to be huge for them, but it's a different viewing experience. They're the kinds of things you watch live. And so things like, we call it BVOD in Australia, broadcast and video on demand, sometimes called AVOD, advertiser supported video on demand. But what we've seen is, a shift towards live and VOD, as opposed to when those services 5 years ago, it was predominantly just a VOD service. But part of that, again, is that the capability wasn't as widespread back then either. So again, it's kind of also been driven by what those companies have been doing.
It's amazing. Like, live sport is a fascinating one because that is certainly things people like to watch live together. But it is more accessible. Like, I've often been in my car and, a match might be on, and I'll actually plug in this is terrible. I plug in my phone to the car radio, and I listen to the commentary from the match when I'm driving because I can't watch it. But it's like, it's so accessible, right? And then actually, here's one for you. If the kids are in the car, what we then do when the ad break comes on is we try from the sound, guess the ad and guess the brand.
Oh,
I think everyone should try it. Everyone should try it. It's fascinating.
Well, and I'd imagine it would probably highlight how poorly branded some of the ads are if you can't get it until the end, which is
Yeah.
still very common practice with a lot of ads.
Yeah, it really does. And then you just know the ones, obviously, like the big ones that have the brilliant distinctive assets and use sound. And again, Karen talks about it with, passive and active attention, that the TV can be on, you may not be in the room, but if you hear the sound, that
Mm.
you can make that connection to the advertising. It's fascinating. I get the impression from what I read, coming out of Australia and the likes of, MI3, that the media platforms in Australia, and I'm not saying that they're not like this elsewhere, so I'm not being trying to be unfair to anyone, but I get the impression they are quite uh, advanced, might be the wrong word, but really open to really understanding the the marketplace that they're operating in with the changes, right? With you know, all things you've just talked about, all the abilities for people to watch content in different ways. And to me, again, what I read, it seems to be that they're not shying away from it. They're kind of leaning into it and kind of really trying to figure out how to provide more value for the brands. Would that be a fair assessment from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I've got great relationships with the major kind of media operators, and there's always a real kind of thirst for knowledge and understanding how things are evolving. Partly in because for some of those businesses they have assets in the game. They've got their own S1 services that they're equally looking to grow and understand how they can fit within the marketplace. I think the other thing too is, it gets a bit of a beat up, but we have some of the most amazing TV measurement in the world. Like, again, going back to my role as kind of head of APAC, what the kinds of things that we're doing in Australia was kind of heads and shoulders above almost anyone else in the world. Probably Barb in the UK, and some of the stuff
Mm.
happening in the US are probably the only equivalents, at least when they were starting. And so, like there's been a huge investment by those businesses to get this great measurement. And it's the kind of thing that, like I would be sitting in a meeting talking about APAC, at the services, and it just wasn't those capabilities flowing through into those other territories. Um, partly through the money, like, obviously these things
Yeah.
cost a lot, and they're not easy. But I also think it was the focus of those businesses and the foresight of those businesses to make those investments.
Yeah, like it is great to see it and great to read. And again, I did a panel with some of the, we call it the traditional media owners based out of Ireland, and but even hearing from them how they're evolving. And one of the things, a guy called Kieran, who's from the radio, representing the radio industry, he was saying, they're looking for CMOs to push and provoke them, as the platforms to what they need, what's coming, what are the things that they're thinking about now, and kind of really trying to challenge them. Because I think that's where it gets better. Because you've alluded to it, in the fact that, as I got the word like intermediary, you're providing the benefit to both sides because it is beneficial to both sides. Like the media performs better, the brand performs better, it all performs, it all works because everyone gets what they need out of it. Like this is a commercial, it's a commercial thing, right?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think they're just being customer focused, right? Like,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
in the same way that a consumer, B2C marketer needs to think about their customer, well, these businesses need to think about what's the needs of their customer. And yeah, I think you're definitely right. There's that appetite. I think they don't want to just invest in research just to get an answer. They want to invest in research so they can learn and they can do better in the future and get the outcomes that they're looking for. And I think I've had a great um, opportunity to observe things that have changed as a result of some of the things that I've helped um, produce through research. And I think that's hugely rewarding for me, but also I would imagine hugely rewarding for those businesses that are involved.
yeah. It's amazing. Actually, interesting you say that because I spoke to uh, Dr. Grace Kite. One of the things she said, it's one of the reasons she kind of set up her magic numbers, was a level of frustration when she saw research sit on a shelf. Like this work gets done, and she's like, "Oh my god, I need to help people make sure this gets, it gets actioned on, and one of the things, she definitely would talk about was the importance of the relationships and, bringing people through the outcomes of the research. And as you said, you're independent. So sometimes I'm sure the answers aren't always what people hope for. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, we get a lot of those. No, and probably the answer is carefully. But in seriousness, I think, yeah, like these are often quite mature, and I mean that in a sense of, these are not new early career researchers that I'm typically dealing with when it comes to commissioning projects. They're kind of seasoned, professionals, and they understand that it doesn't always go the way they wanted to. And to their credit, I think they keep coming back. Like I can think of a really great project that we ran last year, and there was a lot of effort it took to set up, and the results did not stack up. Now, and I've got to be clear, it was because of an issue with the technology of how you deliver ads more than it was to do with that the platform wasn't working. Um, but they kind of walked, like when I was presenting the results, I was a bit nervous because I was like, oh, we've just invested all this time and money to kind of get this, and it hasn't kind of worked. And they were like, actually, this is a big learning for us as a business, because now we know that even though we're meant to be targeting these groups, it hasn't necessarily worked out as we thought it should. And so I think there was some internal learnings that they got out of that research, even if it wasn't necessarily the outcome, the sales outcome that they wanted to put forward in the market. So I think, yeah, there's always a learning opportunity when things
Yeah.
go to plan. So we'll take the win with.
I was going to ask you then, because we're near our time, but like in your observations, are there things that marketers may be doing that I don't mean wrong, but like we could still be getting better, like we could be doing better to improve kind of the outcomes?
Or actually more in general, there's still a big focus on the kind of the new and shiny thing. So versus old media, and kind of going back to our comments around, oh, young people only use TikTok, so I'm going to invest in that. And then you look at the data, and actually, it doesn't kind of really demonstrate that at all. And to be fair, I think part of that comes down to the tools available to media buyers and marketers rather, because sometimes they're not necessarily, you get some data from one system over here and other data from over here. And so it just adds a level of complexity. And what they really want is something where it's all available kind of in one place where you can compare things, kind of apples.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is a bit self-serving, I guess, in the sense that, like that's part of the problems we're trying to solve with the total video work, because we couldn't get something that did that for us. And so, we needed to go and build it ourselves. But, we're a small enterprise. This is, a problem that goes, much further than that, and arguably much further than just video. Like it's, other media as well. And again, I come from a measurement company, so of course I say this, but I don't think there's kind of enough focus and push from marketers about measurement, because, I hear a lot about people wanting to be evidence-based in their decision making. But in order to be evidence-based, you need to have really good, high-quality data. And, one thing that I'm hearing a lot about at the moment is, and again, I'm very much in the thick of it in my industry, but, people say, there's a beat up on TV measurement. It's not come quick enough and fast enough. But then they don't necessarily hold that kind of high standard to other mediums who, aren't necessarily as sophisticated or indeed as complicated. And I think, at the end of the day, if marketers can, marketers ultimately control the amount of media investment, which flows down into how measurement is, again, paid for. Everything comes back to money. And so, in the long run, if they're looking to be evidence-based and they want to make their decisions based on data, they need to help, move the needle in investments in data, because that's the only way that it's going to come about. And hold all media to the same standard, so that then it kind of pushes the industry to work together and come together to make it feasible.
Yeah, and I think probably not to put the onus on, but I think in terms of investment, a lot of smaller brands can't afford it, and so they have to benefit from the work maybe that other bigger brands who can afford it that can push that agenda. Because it's
Yes.
because then it will become available, kind of democratize it a bit. I think, and but even I think even on a smaller scale, I was wondering as you were talking there, it's like are we? Like you were saying, the next new shiny thing, we're always like, we do it. I know we do it. It's like, oh, over here, but like, are we setting ourselves up to even test those things well, and go, well, let's have a look, but let's test it and let's understand what we want to learn from this, as opposed to just going all in and going, oh, they're all over here now, like Clubhouse. Well, like, that was the thing for a minute.
Yeah. What did happen to Clubhouse? That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. Is that, I think that's a really, really big challenge that the industry faces, because in part, a lot of those pieces, maybe like industry-wide pieces that are, demonstrating the strength of platforms are often done so by industry bodies, which sometimes don't then get the same level of acceptance, even though, and again, because there's a bit of inside baseball, I've been on the other side of the fence, and the level of kind of detail and scrutiny that they get before it leaves the building is huge, like probably more so than some of the client work that happens. So
Yeah.
I think, like it's there, but it will always be tarnished by the fact of where it comes from, even if it's incredibly valid and independent and run that way. So yeah, I think there needs to be better vehicles for that stuff to happen, because we do need to learn from it and it needs to be shared. I mean, the flip side of that is often people want that commercial advantage as well, which is why they might go on their own path or train themselves. So there's always going to be that challenge. But yeah, I guess, we can be purists because we sit above it and can say, well, actually, we should do it all for the greater good.
Yeah. Well, listen, Pete, thanks so much for joining me. It's been fantastic to meet you, have this conversation. I think, look, for me, these are important conversations to have, to continue to just kind of, explore, understand, get great advice for marketers. And obviously, again, people can go to marketingscientist.com and look more at the research you have available. Do you do work outside of Australia as well, or is it most you do? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're doing work in Europe right now. We've got some work in across Asia Pacific. So yeah, we are. I wouldn't say we're global. We're almost global.
I'd call that global. Yeah. Well, listen, thanks so much for spending time with me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been really fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Peter. I really was looking forward to chatting to Peter. I know his research is really, really fascinating, really, really interesting. So many insights. I love the piece we were talking about sponsorship and, how the product and the brand can be embedded into programming now, and how media owners are certainly more open to doing this. And we're kind of seeing that integration much more strongly, particularly over this side of the world. We've seen the likes of Boots and programs like Love Island. So great to see it and great to hear about Peter's research and work. And definitely do go check out the marketingscientist.com, where Peter has all of his research available for you to check out. So thanks so much for tuning into this episode of That's What I Call Marketing. As we say at the start of the episode, we will end the episode by asking you, if you have enjoyed this episode, to rate or review it. And thanks so much to diplomat.agency for their support of this agency. If you know of a brand that is looking to expand internationally, being very successful in their home market, but trying to figure out where to go next and how to go about it, diplomat.agency is who you need to send them to. So do check out diplomat.agency for all their services. We'll be back next Tuesday with another episode of That's What I Call Marketing. So until then, from me, your host, Conor Byrne, thanks so much for tuning in.